Hello, my friends. A werewolf wants to kill me with an axe. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I was 10 years old when my mother took me to a Halloween store for the first time. She had finally given in to taking me there after I had spent weeks begging to get a costume that hadn't been made by my grandmother, even though buying one wasn't really in our family's budget. I promise I won't pick out something expensive, I said, ever the reasonable child. I just don't want to be a witch again. Oh Leah, what's wrong with being a witch again? You look adorable. She clearly did not understand. I'm not a baby anymore, Mom, I said. I don't want to be adorable. I want to be cool. Can't you just be a cool witch? Of course I could, I said, but I don't want to. Well, do you even know what kind of cool costume you want? I'll know it when I see it, I said. When she finally took my infant siblings and me to the costume store, I could hardly contain my excitement. The place was covered floor to ceiling in seasonal decorations, with bright orange gourds smiling up at us and purple bats glittering from above. I was in heaven. Look at these, I said, dashing to a pair of skeletons who were posed like ballroom dancers, the hand of one on the waist of the other. Isn't that romantic? My mother, for all of her infinite patience, could not pull her attention away from my baby brother and sister, who had begun to cry the moment we entered the store. That's great, Leah, she said, hoisting my sister over one shoulder as other customers shot her daggers over the sound of two infants screaming. I was too young to notice my mother struggling, so I simply ran ahead without a second thought, bolting down an aisle decorated like a haunted house. I was already picking up plastic spiders and snakes when I heard my mother yelling a warning behind me not to go too far. When I finally found the aisle of costumes, I was in awe. The walls were lined with colorful printouts of people dressed as vampires, witches, and Power Rangers. Having grown up with handmade reproductions of name-brand costumes, I was eager to wear everything I could get my hands on. Moving in between the other kids who were crowding around the posters which advertised the available outfits, I managed to grab a handful of costumes: a swamp monster, an alien, a scarecrow, a medieval queen, and a werewolf. I rushed toward the dressing rooms, where the teenage attendant leaned against the doorway and reading a comic book. He looked up at me as I approached, nodding in recognition at my polyester treasure and scooting aside to let me into the dressing rooms without a word. I could have spent the rest of the evening trying on costumes in front of that dressing room mirror. The thrill of becoming someone or something else with a simple outfit change felt so powerful to me, but when I finally stepped into the werewolf costume, I knew I had found the one. The paws, gloves, really, that came with it were a little large for me, but I didn't mind. I practiced growling into the mirror, feeling powerful and scary, but, most of all, cool. I knew I had to show my mother immediately. I realized then that she had probably been worried about me, considering how long I had been trying on my costumes. And I made my way out of the dressing room with my mask and paws still firmly in place. As soon as I stepped into the store, I knew something was wrong. It was dark, and there were no kids milling around near the costumes, no parents shuffling around and looking anxious. I moved to peek my head around the corner, seeing only a row of empty aisles. "Hello," I called, hoping the bored teenage attendant would at least still be around. Instead, there was nothing and no one. The store's fluorescence had faded, leaving only a dim orange glow from the pumpkin-shaped string lights hung across each aisle. Every shadow seemed to breathe and swell around me. "Mum, can you hear me?" I couldn't keep my voice from shaking. knowing instinctively that she wasn't here. I called out for her again and again. My palms started to sweat under the werewolf gloves, and I was on the verge of tears. A sound like toppling boxes caught my attention. I turned toward it, looking between the darkened aisles of decorations. "Is someone there?" I said, raising my voice. I could hear it echoing off of the linoleum. No response. Instead, the sound came again, louder. I did what any 10 years old would have done in that circumstance. I went to investigate. The string lights did nothing to help me navigate the store's aisles, which felt so much more narrow in the dark. I could smell the cheap plastic from the masks and the scent of temporary color hairspray all around me. As I moved, I kept one werewolf paw held out for navigation, hoping to prevent myself from falling into a display of fake mustaches or plastic vampire fangs. Every footstep I made rang out in perfect clarity, the tapping of my shoes clicking softly in the dark. I wished for a flashlight, anything to push the shadows away. It was then that I noticed a singular overhead light by the entrance, its low fluorescent glow a faint orange. The sound I came to investigate had since stopped, and I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat in my ears. So I made for the light. As the towering walls of the aisles peeled away from my vision, I saw it. The top of its head brushed the ceiling tiles, its neck bent crookedly to accommodate. The proportions looked wrong and, even as a child, I was aware of just how unnatural its existence seemed. This impossibly tall figure staring down at me, with its head cocked to the side. It could only glare down the length of its nose, with its large eyes swollen out of its almost human skull. The arms were long and withered like the rest of its emaciated, shaking frame. Each new angle of the creature presented a fresh terror, and I could feel myself breaking into a cold sweat. The worst part, however, was the smile. It had no teeth, none that I could see, at least, but that didn't stop it from grinning. There was a wet shine to its lips, which stretched the skin around them like the film that appears on boiled milk, and a thin line of drool began to fall from the edge of its mouth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn and run, to hide back in the dressing room until the morning and pretend this had never happened. My every nerve was on fire, and I could feel my palms tingling under the werewolf paws. Slowly, the figure revealed a hand so large, the act of moving it toppled a pile of cardboard boxes with a soft thud. The figure made no sign of acknowledging the sound, its unblinking eyes staring straight at me. It raised its hand, wide and spindly like a spoked wheel, and pressed one narrow finger against its lips. Silence. The sound was less like human speech and more like an animal imitating it. The creature grinned again, this time opening its mouth wider and, with a crack, unhinging its jaw to reveal a hidden row of teeth in the back of its throat, each of them thin and pointed like barbed quills. It was then that I was finally able to scream. I turned on my heels and booked it down the aisle, air catching in my throat, unable to breathe. I had never known panic like this, had never known so clearly that I was actually in danger. Behind me, I could hear the figure topple more boxes, but I didn't look back. I ran until my feet were burning, streaking into the changing room, the curtains of the dressing area flapping around me as I dove inside. A bench draped with a dark cloth sat in the corner. I hurriedly turned it and pushed it against the edge of the doorway. I moved further through the covered hallway, the mirrors lining each wall sending a chill up my spine whenever I caught my own reflection. Outside, I could hear the creature knocking displays to the floor. It was still searching for me. At the end of the hall, I ducked into a small room with the door, pulling it closed behind me as quietly as I could. I pressed my back against the wall, squatting down to catch my breath. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of the bench being shoved aside, the feet scraping against the linoleum behind the door. I could hear it smacking its lips, breath heavy and labored. I remember thinking that was something we had in common. The doorknob began to shake, and I pressed my back against the wood with all the strength I had. My legs shook from the force as I propped them against the nearby wall and used them to push myself into the door. Outside, the creature began to giggle, breathy bursts of laughter that sounded like dry kindling being rubbed together. I braced for the door to shatter, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real, this isn't happening," I whispered. Each groan of pressure on the door felt more urgent than the one before it. "Stop it," I said, and then, screaming, "Stop." The door gave way. The tall teenager who was stationed at the changing rooms burst into the room behind me and I fell against the opposite wall with a groan. "Are you okay?" he asked. "What the hell is all the screaming about?" I was in a daze, looking back down the hallway behind him to see if the creature was still there in the shadows. Instead, I saw people milling about and carrying clear plastic bags of costumes in their arms. "Kid?" the attendant asked. "Hello. Sorry," I said, getting to my feet. "I'm fine, I promise." "What about all the yelling?" "You freaked some toddlers out." "I thought I saw something," I said, unsure of how to articulate what I'd just experienced. "Oh, I understand," he said, nodding. "You do? Don't worry," the teenager said. "I'll go get the bug spray." As he turned to leave, I could see my mother waiting impatiently at the counter, bouncing my sister on her hip while pushing my brother in the stroller. I quickly shoved the werewolf costume back into the bag and ran towards her, waving my free arm over my head. "There you are, Leah," she said. "Did you find something cool?" I pushed the costume forward and she smiled. "Very cool, indeed. Ready to go?" "Please," I said, nodding emphatically. I couldn't help wondering if any of the night had been real. My mind was reeling, playing back every moment with sharp clarity, but the evening had felt so surreal that I didn't know if I could trust my own senses. As we made our way to the checkout, I instinctively looked back over my shoulder once more, peering down the dark hallway of the changing rooms. There, in a sliver of shadow, was the creature, bent at the waist and leering. It raised a single finger to its mouth once again, eyes wild, and mimed a final silence. Hello, my scary friends. Oh no. I didn't want to kill the bird. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. So about 3 years ago I got a Kangal puppy and a Timber Wolf and Alaskan Malamute mix. They both absolutely love my nice that I now have to take care of since my brother passed. My wolf hybrid is very trained too and I have a lot of experience with training canines, so I used it to train her and she loved my nice and was always as gentle and caring as possible. My Kanga's name is Mjolnir after Thor's hammer from Marvel Comics because Mjolnir is absolutely immovable one he wants to lay somewhere. My wolf hybrid's name is Jessie. We got Mjolnir and Jessie when they were puppies when my nice was 8 years old. I live in the backwoods of Colorado where your only neighbors are a mile or 3 drive down the road but still far. One day when my daughter was walking them and playing with them in my giant field that looked more like a blank plot of land without anything in it than a yard. I was doing dishes and was able to see her most of the time she was out there. I wasn't too worried because at one point in time when Mjolnir and Jessie were playing with my daughter outside while I was repairing my gutters, a pack of 4 coyotes showed up. I was doing some lawn work and was listening to music, and it was only until I felt a loud body shaking bark from Jolna that I found out what was happening. I turned around and saw my niece running towards me while Jolna and Jessie followed her, but followed her while being turned around so they could have her back. I picked her up as soon as I saw her running towards me and put her inside my house for safety. Right as I closed the door, I heard two different sets of yipping, and neither were my dogs. I went back out there to help my dogs get rid of the coyotes or get them to run away. I didn't notice at the time because I was panicking, but one of the coyotes put a gash on my niece's arm. When I had gotten over to the coyotes with my dogs, the coyotes had already been running away. But Jolna and Jessie ran right in front of them to stop them. I've had to kill a rabid wolf or two in my times of living in the Rocky Mountains, and any time I'd see a wolf that was trying to attack me, it didn't look friendly. I saw my dogs circling the coyote pack, growling and snarling worse than anything I've heard a dog or wolf growl. Jolna and Jessie didn't want them to leave. They were out for blood, and any and all heads associated with the coyotes gashing my niece's arm. My niece was only 10 at the time, so she was very vulnerable. The coyotes kind of huddled together, but one of them decided to bite at my wolf hybrid. Well, if you live in the country and have to deal with wolves or coyotes or both, you know a single wolf in peak condition could most likely kill two coyotes on its own, with battle scars of course. But once that coyote tried to nip at Jessie, all hell broke loose. Without hesitation or thought, Jessie latched onto its neck after ducking the coyote's bite and ran through the pack of coyotes with the "save me, I'm dying for fuck's sake" yipping coyote in her mouth. Jolna wasted no time, and as soon as their huddle stopped, he almost got bit by one of the coyotes, but as the coyote reached to bite his face, neck, he opened his mouth as far as possible. I was about 30 meters of running away from them, but I could see and hear Jolna's snap from his jaws. The coyote intended to bite him, but instead got an ironic case of karma. Jolna snapped his jaws probably as hard as he could and completely and cleanly bit the coyote's jaw and snout off. The other two coyotes saw the slaughter and tried to run away. The other two coyotes were long gone and dead at the time when the other two tried to run away. Jolna and Jessie saw them try to run away, and yet again, my dogs chased after them. I wasn't able to catch up with them or even shoot at them without possibly harming one of my dogs. Jolna was a gigantic dog. Even for a Kangal, he was probably bigger and stronger than a top of the genetics line Kangal. It shocked me that they were so violent to the coyotes, seeing as they had never even bit each other or even nipped at my niece or me. They were very calm, caring and sweet dogs. Attacking my niece must have set them off, because they ran off into the woods near my house tailing the coyotes, and I didn't see them until an hour later. After they left, I saw some blood on my hands and knew it was my niece's. I went inside and she was pouring some of my favorite whiskey on her gash. It wasn't too big, and I was a combat medic for us Marines and had fixed up worse. I stitched her up and asked her where she learned to use alcohol for wounds, and she said one of the most adorable responses I'd ever heard. "Remember that night you were drunk with one of your friends and he accidentally shot you with a crossbow? That's where I learned it." I couldn't help but smile and laugh in relief that she was okay, but I was still concerned about my dogs, so I grabbed my Glock and knife my brother gave me as a Christmas present because he made knives and stuff. I told my niece to stay in my house while I go look for my dogs. She agreed and stayed in the house. I ran out to the woods and started calling their names, and once I hit the pupil of the woods I felt a very cold, chilling breeze, and I knew something wasn't right. I felt like I had no choice but to turn around and go back. When walking back to my house I saw a blackish shadow that looked like a big black necrotic wolf following me. I didn't want to leave my dogs in the woods, but I didn't want to die looking for them. There was urgent care about 1.5 miles away from me, and took my niece to get a rabies shot from the gash from the coyotes. She got it, and the doctor said I did a good job stitching her up and that she needs to have some rest for the next couple of days to let her wound heal. We got back and I saw a pretty shocking sight. I saw Jesse and Mjolnir standing over 4 more dead coyotes as if they intentionally went out to hunt for any and all coyotes they could find. There were about 6 dead coyotes in my yard at that point. Both of them were absolutely drenched in blood. The whites of their fur were turned into a dark red and a light brown from the coyotes. Yet neither had a single wound more than a small scratch that wasn't even from the coyotes, looked more like they got caught on a sharp branch while running. My niece ran up to them happy and excited, then got sad when she saw the dead coyotes, but her sadness was overshadowed by her relief to see my dogs. My dogs looked very worn out and tired, yet they walked up to her in relief too to see she was safe. Jesse laid down at her feet and Mjolnir just sat there with his head down out of exhaustion while my niece petted both of them. What was the point of that story? Well, mostly for the part where I saw a huge necrotic wolf out of the corner of my eyes in the woods while looking for my dogs. It was very bright outside, especially since it was 4 p.m., so I couldn't see its eyes or even look at it directly, or else it disappears. When I was doing dishes a couple of months ago, my dogs and niece were outside playing like usual when suddenly all 3 froze. That was very out of character for all of them. I felt something was wrong, the same chilling cold breeze when I was in the woods looking for my dogs. I started to hear growling from my dogs and heavy stressed breathing from my niece. I grabbed my Glock and knife and went out there as fast as possible. I saw a wolf that was as bigger than a grizzly bear, but it was missing whole chunks of fur missing. The fur that was there was matted and the skin that showed looked black and necrotic. Its eyes were bright orange, red. It stood there calmly, no signs of aggression from it, but I could feel its evil intentions. I started shooting at it but didn't land a single shot because I was in pure astonishment and panic. It came closer to my dogs and niece and I stepped in front of all of them and shot it in the chest. The shot stumbled it a little bit but didn't look like it did really anything to it. I told my niece to go inside because I could tell that the hellhound's gaze was set upon my niece and nothing else. It was just slowly walking towards us and I kept shooting. My dogs went in to attack it, and as soon as that happened my niece ran inside and my dogs were latched onto its huge neck. It wasn't bleeding nor was it acknowledging the 2 big-ass dogs on its neck, but they did stumble the huge fucker. The hellhound that I'll call Cerberus, if you know Greek mythology then you'll know, bit Mjolnir's tail and flung him across my yard and then shook off Jesse. At this point, he was quickly walking towards my house as if I wasn't even there. I reloaded my clip and continued to shoot at it. I was out of clips and only had a knife, so as to best I could I jumped on its back and started stabbing it in the spine to try and paralyze it. That didn't work, so while Cerberus was trying to throw his head back to bite me I stabbed him at least 5 times, all where you'd assume a wolf's major arteries were. My dogs got up and collectively went for Cerberus' front legs. It knocked the beast over on its side. Cerberus didn't even flinch or yipe. My dogs began tearing into him, trying to kill him best they could. I saw the same ferocity from my dogs when those coyotes attacked. I stood up while my niece was screaming from inside my house but was more focused on the huge demon beast trying to kill us. I stomped on its rib cage a couple of times and stabbed it even more. It just stood up and shook me and my dogs off. I couldn't get my knife out of its chest, so I figured the only options I had left were to kick it in its face. So here I am, a 6 feet 3 inches 310-pound man of nearly pure muscle, BMI of 12%, about to roundhouse kick a whole fucking hellhound right in its shit, and this thing was a lot bigger and a lot heavier than a grizzly bear. And just as I kicked its head, it just looked at me as if a fly landed on him. He looked angry, and for the first time it saw him, he wasn't calm. He was angry, and growling at me and got in my face snarling. I was scared and was about to run when my dogs came up and kept attacking him. Then all of a sudden, I hear a howl from in the woods, not a wolf or dog howl. A lot louder than that. It sounded like a wolf trying to call its pack. Cerberus, Mjolnir, and Jesse stood still and froze. My dogs looked relieved and excited, but Cerberus did not. Cerberus got very submissive and defensive and started to slowly walk away while my dogs kept growling and barking at him. I would have thought that the howl was from one of the Cerberus pack, but the way he was acting said otherwise. I saw something moving in the trees around my house, and Cerberus was growing more and more fearful of what was coming. Cerberus watched the moving branches and trees as I did and started growling towards them, no longer concerned with me, my niece, or my dogs. He tried to sprint away but to no avail. I saw 3 pure white beings that I swear to God are werewolves come out bolting towards Cerberus. They surrounded him with one at each corner he could try and escape through. These white werewolf things were about the same size as Cerberus, and the biggest one towered over Cerberus even while crouching. They didn't seem as tough as Cerberus though. They were still a hell of a lot stronger than a hollow point from a Glock, surprisingly. They had long, wickedly sharp claws. They were relentlessly attacking Cerberus with claw slashes and bites, and even at one point, the big one got a deep kick right to Cerberus's face. Cerberus may have been tougher than all 3 of them, but definitely wasn't stronger than them. A repeated combo of claw slashes, bites, and other crazy shit those werewolves did, and eventually got Cerberus to run away limping. My dogs somehow jumped into the fight against Cerberus. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out when the fuck I was transported to the supernatural universe. My dogs and the werewolves kept growling and barking at Cerberus until they were sure he was gone. I had gotten back inside after, because there's no way in hell I'm gonna be in the same area as 3 gigantic werewolves. I was starstruck that my dogs didn't have a problem with those werewolves around them. Once Cerberus was gone, my dogs ran up to my door howling for me to come out. And regardless of what everything I knew told me, I went out there. The werewolves were walking up right towards my house, and so I grabbed a shotgun and pointed it at them. Mjolnir put his paw up on the gun and tried to lower it. The werewolves weren't concerned about me or my niece. They were concerned about my dogs. The biggest one, that I assume is their alpha, got on all fours and walked up to my dogs and then stood upright. He raised his hand to my dogs and petted them, and then knelt down and shook his head at me like he was non-verbally saying yes while he had a 12-gauge Mossberg pointed at his head. My dogs were excitedly licking the werewolf as if they'd seen an old playmate or friend after not seeing them for years. The other 2 werewolves laid behind the alpha as if they were sleeping. I was flabbergasted in all honesty and didn't know what the hell to do. Before leaving the front of my house, the alpha handed me an odd necklace that looked like a master craftsman made it. It was a wolf's tooth but a lot bigger. The tooth was in a metal casing of sorts with a string that looked and felt like silk. You could clearly see the bright white wolf's tooth, and the metal surrounding it was covered in Norse, Celtic, and other weird runes and symbols. After handing me the necklace while I was still shaking, he pointed at my niece, who was looking in amazement through my window, and then pointed at his chest, presumably telling me she should wear it from now on. The 3 werewolves, now covered in black blood, all went to the center of my yard and howled. My dogs decided to join them, and once the howling was over, I heard howls from 3 different places, with more than 4 howls coming from each. It was an odd sense of relief that made me feel safe in a weird way. I'd always loved dogs and wolves in general. I even beat this guy's ass because he kicked a woman dog. She was walking down the street. In other words, I don't take animal cruelty very well. I still get shivers when I go into the woods to hunt because Cerberus might still be out there, but I felt an odd sense of comfort whenever I see a giant bipedal wolf in the woods. I get most of my food from hunting and only go into town to get bread, fruit, vegetables and all that. I usually farm for vegetables and fruit, but in wintertime it's impossible. A week or so ago I was hunting some elk and shot one right in the chest, but it ran away. Then I saw a werewolf chase after it. The beast looked like it came from nowhere but still chased it. I came back home disappointed that one of those werewolves got it, but lo and behold, the deer was, with a single bite taken out of its belly, laying on my front porch dead. I don't know why these werewolf things are concerned about me or my niece or my dogs, but they are, and as long as they protect me and my family from that hellhound, I'm okay with it. My dogs don't seem to mind them either. I translated some of the runes and symbols on the necklace, and the ones I translated were things like protection, knowing, health, and the last one I translated was she-wolf. I talked to one of my friends who did nothing but study cryptids and monsters and brought everything to him that I heard about it. He explained to me that in some religions and beliefs that werewolves were awful sinners that God cursed to either protect man, kill sinners, or hunt demons, hellhounds, other things, but mostly to protect good people. He told me that Cerberus must be a hellhound or a demon wolf with everlasting hunger and was nearly impossible to kill. Until I can move out of this foresty plot of land behind Cheyenne Mountain, I'm gonna need to be wary about Cerberus. He said the runes I translated means that the werewolves, as long as my niece had the necklace on, they know if she was in danger, in bad health, and will protect her, and that they consider her one of their own. I asked why they consider her their own, and he said that some werewolves and cryptids are very kind and loving and even sometimes downright aggressive to protect a child of another species, especially human children. I asked him what that had to do with them considering her their own, and he said that my niece and their werewolves must have had many pleasant previous encounters. I went home and asked her about it because she never mentioned anything like that. Apparently, she thought werewolves were a normal everyday thing in the woods. Apparently one day when walking around the woods of my house while I was doing housework, she met a werewolf and thought it was cute. I asked her why she'd try and be friends with one, and she said that they're very calm and melancholy to her. And when she first met one, she said it acted like a happy puppy to her. She even said that sometimes they let her ride on their back to go running through the woods. I was more shocked she didn't tell me this heap of shit before, rather than the fact that I now know werewolves exist. So now my niece is considered a she-wolf to the werewolves around my house. There's a hellhound dead set on killing my niece, and there are werewolves dead set on not letting that happen. It's been a crazy couple of years since my brother died and having to take care of my niece, not to mention the crazy shit in these woods. I figured since there's no other place to tell this story without being called crazy that I'd put it on here because I can get some advice on what to do. I don't mind there werewolves here, but I fear one day they'll harm my niece or me. One good piece of news is that my dogs have been acting a lot better since Cerberus attacked. All I know is that to avoid further chaos I need to leave this place for good. My niece has even been doing better in school since she got the necklace the werewolf gave to her. Any and all advice is welcomed and needed. Hello, friends. This werewolf is not alive. Oh no. He is alive. His fingers are moving. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Gerald Bishop was the doctor you called when you needed immediate medical attention but didn't want to go to the hospital. It's not that Gerald had failed out of medical school, or had botched up surgery or something like that. Gerald was quite a capable and sober doctor. It's just that, years ago, he had met somebody who presented an opportunity to him, and the money was quite good. He could make more in 3 nights than he could an entire year if he'd kept his old job at the hospital. I was Gerald's assistant. If the phone rang, it meant that somebody with a lot of money was in trouble. We had a few different houses that we preferred to work out of, but we were also willing to travel. There was a decommissioned ambulance for local trips and Gerald's airplane for long-distance trips. All travel expenses, naturally, were reimbursed. We didn't discriminate. If somebody came in with a gunshot wound, we didn't ask where it came from, except to get a clearer picture of how best to treat it. If a celebrity came in with something jammed up his rectum, and that happened more than once, we got it unstuck and sent him on his way. We were on call 24/7, though mostly we worked in the dead of night, and there were only 12 nights out of the 365 where we weren't on call. Any other night was fair game. It didn't matter if it were Christmas, or if Gerald were in Europe on vacation with his family. Sometimes, I'd have to treat the clients myself while he walked me through it over video chat, but we always answered the call, except for those 12 nights. Those nights were the full moons, and we couldn't answer any calls because I was watching over Gerald and his wife in their basement, where they were bound in silver chains because they were werewolves. They could control their urges most any other time, except when the moon was full. Then they would send their 2 kids to a sitter and call me over. I'd come over with the gun with silver bullets in it they had given me. If one of us gets out, shoot us, Gerald told me on that first horrifying night. If you can, shoot to wound. If you can't, shoot to kill. It's okay, William. It's the agreement that Mary and I came to. Then I'd chain them up. The transformation was hideous. Bones shifted under the flesh as the bishops writhed around in seemingly unbearable pain. It was as though an invisible force were pulling their faces away, contorting the nose and mouth into a snout. I watched their teeth clatter to the floor as sharp fangs poked their way through bloody gums. Hair sprouted all over as body parts stretched and pulled in a ballet of horror. Instinctively, I pulled the trigger of the gun the first time I witnessed it. The safety catch was engaged, so no bullets came forth. The transformation took less than a minute but would haunt my nightmares for months, as would the rest of that night. Eventually, as with most horrors, I would grow used to it. But not for a long time. I sat in a chair in the opposite corner of the basement, near the stairs, and watched the bishops all night, as they raged against their chains. howling in pain each time the silver dug in. I prayed the whole time that the chains wouldn't break loose. If they did, I knew that I would likely be dead, silver bullet or not. The night seemed endless, but at long last it did end. As the first hints of dawn crept in through the daylight windows, the beasts bent down, scooped up their human teeth, and swallowed them. As their bodies underwent another painful transformation, they slumped to the ground and lost consciousness. It was the night of a full moon when our business line rang and I declined to answer it. It was the first time that anybody had actually tried to call it during a full moon, as we spread the news of our night off throughout our networks of clientele well in advance each month. The phone kept ringing. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at it quickly, as the two beasts raged and howled on the other side of the basement. The call was from Salvatore Satori, a man who was almost certainly a mob boss. I declined the call and set the phone to do not disturb as Gerald gnashed his wolf fangs. The next day, we were informed that Salvatore's son had been shot in the stomach and was bleeding out when he'd called us. We could have probably saved him, but we didn't, and he died. A few days later, we got a call from Candice Hart while we were on the golf course. She was an assassin for hire, and we had treated Candice and her friends for various wounds over the years. When she called that day, she sounded hysterical. "Candice," I said, "slow down. You're not making sense." "A fucking werewolf got Melissa," she said, breathlessly. "Ripped her fucking guts out." "A werewolf?" I asked. Gerald looked at me with a frown. "Look, whatever's going on, can you meet us at the spot in 15 minutes? "I'm already there," said Candice. "Fucking hurry." Then she hung up. "Did she say something about a werewolf?" asked Gerald, throwing his 9-iron into the bag and getting in the golf cart. "She did. She said it eviscerated her partner." "Is that even possible during the day?" "It is," said Gerald. "Call her back and tell her to meet us at the other spot." "But that's a half-hour away from where she is now," I said. "If the attack happens near where they are, and it probably did if her partner is still alive after getting gutted, then the wolf is probably close by. By the time we get there, we may have company. So the first priority is to get them further away. That also gives us time to prepare for them. No time will be lost." In the end, I called Candice back and told her the new plan. She wasn't happy about it but agreed. 15 minutes later, Gerald and I were at one of our houses, prepping for surgery. "You have the gun, I assume?" asked Gerald. He had ordered me to always carry the gun with the silver bullets in it, in case he turned unexpectedly. I nodded. "Better give it to me," said Gerald. "I have a bit of experience here, sadly." I pulled the gun out of my travel bag and handed it over. He tucked it into the back of his waistband. After we had the basics set up, we went outside with the stretcher and waited. Soon, we saw Candice's car come tearing down the long dirt driveway surrounded by trees. She pulled onto the lawn, right in front of the door to the house, and jumped out of the car. "Jesus fuck. Help her," she shouted. She looked shaken, more shaken than the time she had driven herself to our house with a bullet wound in her chest. She jerked open the rear door to her car. I looked inside and saw that Candice's account of Melissa's condition had been accurate. Melissa was moaning in shock, manually holding her entrails inside her opened-up abdomen. The three of us lifted her carefully onto the stretcher and carried her inside. "What happened?" asked Gerald. "It was a fucking werewolf," said Candice. "Werewolves aren't real," said Gerald. We set Melissa on the operating table. I strapped her down and then injected her with the anesthetic. "Look," said Candice. "We were hired for a hit. They didn't give us any intel on the targets beyond an address and photos, just said it had to be done today. For big money. So against my better judgment, due to Melissa's urging, I agreed. So we get there and take out 2 of the targets. No problem. But the 3rd target, she turned into a fucking werewolf right in front of us. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. And she did this. Candace pointed to Melissa's prone body. Is she going to make it? Gerald reached in and began rearranging Melissa's guts. I don't suppose you know her blood type? Of course I do, said Candace. You think we're amateurs? It's AB. I went to the refrigerator, got a packet of AB, and began preparing the transfusion. She might make it, said Gerald, shining a light inside of Melissa's abdomen. Or she might not. You don't seriously expect us to believe that you saw an actual werewolf? This looks more like a clean wound from a very sharp blade of some kind. The organs are all intact. I was not experienced as Gerald was, but I could see that what he was saying wasn't true. It did indeed look like a wild animal had attacked Melissa. The cut itself was clean, but the organs had been mauled. Look, said Candace, believe me or don't believe me. Just get my baby fixed up, okay? That's when we heard a banging coming from the back door. Who the fuck is that? Cried Candace. I was about to ask you the same thing, said Gerald. Did somebody follow you here? The police maybe? Were you speeding? Driving erratically? Again, I'm not a fucking amateur, said Candace. Anyway, whoever it is, I'll take care of them. She pulled a gun out of her boot. I'll do my job. You two do your jobs, right? Before Gerald could answer, we heard a wild animal howl coming from just outside. I watched Candace as all of the colors drained from her face and was replaced by a look of pure terror. It's here, she whispered. Gerald rubbed his temples as the banging resumed, accompanied now by a series of low growls. Then he pulled the gun out from behind his back. We heard the sound of the door splintering apart, and something stepping inside. I panicked and grabbed a scalpel, though I knew it would be useless. Only the silver bullets in Gerald's gun would do any good against a werewolf. I forced myself to breathe as Candace and Gerald lifted their guns and pointed them at the doorway to the room. Shooting them doesn't work, whispered Candace. Not even a headshot. It's a fucking werewolf. I told you it was. I heard the sound of claws scraping against the hardwood floors, getting closer. I thought briefly about injecting myself with morphine, just so that my death would be less painful. No, I tried to convince myself. It's okay. Gerald's one of them. He can handle this. But when I looked at Gerald, he looked far from confident, more composed than Candace, or what I imagined I myself looked like, but not calm. And Gerald was always calm, even the day he had handed me the gun for the first time and told me to shoot the wolf version of him should it escape from the chains. The wolf was just around the corner, and then before I could process what was happening, I saw it, in the doorway. A flurry of hair and claws, leaping through the air at us, howling. I closed my eyes in preparation for death and heard 2 gunshots ring out. When I didn't die, I opened my eyes. The wolf was on the ground, bleeding out from the center of its head. My God, I heard Gerald say. What have I done? That was. The wolf twitched once and then stopped moving. Once it was dead, it began to transform back into human form. From where I was, I could only see the back of the head, but I saw that it was a woman. Candace was standing closer. Yep, she said. That's the bitch we were supposed to kill. We got her kids. But then she turned into a fucking werewolf. But it looks like we finally got her. So do you guys believe me now? And can you fix Melissa? I took a few steps closer and looked down at the dead body. It was Mary Bishop. Gerald turned in an instant. It wasn't like a full moon when he and Mary had struggled against the transformation. When it was as though they were trying to will each bone, each hair follicle, to stay in place, and failing to do so. Gerald wasn't fighting his wolf nature anymore. He was embracing it. And how? Candice was able to fire off an impotent shot from her gun before Gerald lunged at her and sank his fangs into her shoulder. He lifted her then with his jaws, off her feet, and flung her against a wall with a flick of his neck. She collided with a shelf of medical supplies, which all went clattering to the floor as she cried out in pain and shock. She slumped down, clearly injured and terrified, but still conscious. I eyed the gun with the silver bullets that Gerald had dropped to the floor when he had transformed into a wolf. But I stood frozen, too afraid to make a move, too unsure of what move to make. He had just found out that his children had been murdered, and then he had shot his own wife dead. I could understand the man's rage, but it wasn't a man that I was encountering. The beast that was Gerald let out a low growl and jumped up onto the table where Melissa was still strapped, with an open wound across her abdomen, exposing her guts. Gerald clamped down on a string of intestine in his mouth and yanked violently, tearing it apart. A foul stench spread across the room, as did a spray of blood and half-formed fecal matter. Melissa didn't stir, as she was still under the effects of the anesthetics. No matter what she had done, I was grateful for that. Her screams would have made it harder to think, and it was already hard enough to think. I saw an underarm crutch hanging on the wall and reached for it while Gerald was distracted. I thought that I could use it to slide the gun over to me without getting closer to the dangerously furious wolf. Gerald was ripping into Melissa's neck now, pulling her esophagus out. I kept my eyes on that scene while I grasped the crutch and lifted it off the hook. It was difficult to watch. I'd seen most any medical procedure you can imagine, but those always happened under controlled conditions. Here now was a wolf tearing into a human being, tearing at the flesh, pulling away organs, flinging them away, and then going for more. Behind this scene, I saw Candice grasp onto a shelf and pull herself to her feet. As soon as she did, Gerald whipped his head around and let out a howl. Then he leapt. I reached out with the crutch and tried to drag the gun to me, and Gerald dug all 10 claws on his hands into Candice's neck. I succeeded in pulling the gun a foot or so closer to me as Gerald pulled Candice's head off of her body. He held it up above his own head, howled again, and then dropped it with a sickening splat. Then he turned to face me, growling. I dropped the crutch and he dropped to all fours and began stalking towards me. "Gerald," I said. "It's me, William. It's over. You got your revenge. It was well deserved. Now please come back." Gerald bounded through the air and impacted me, knocking me to the ground with his impossibly heavy weight on top of me. He bit into my shoulder and tore a chunk away. The pain was unbearable, and I screamed out, "Gerald!" He stopped mid-lunge, with his terrifying maw hanging open. He leaned his face into mine, his pink eyes inches away from my own, his hot breath stinking of meat. Then he closed his jaw and began sniffing me with his snout. "Please," I muttered. Then he turned and ran out of the room. I dressed the wound on my shoulder while I tried to think about what to do. The burning pain made it difficult to focus, but I was eventually able to gain my bearings. Salvatore Satori. He must have put a hit on Gerald's family as payback for us not saving his son's life. That was the only thing that made sense. So now Gerald was almost certainly on his way to perpetuate the cycle of revenge. I looked down at Mary's dead body and couldn't blame Gerald, but he had given me clear instructions on what to do if he ever was unleashed to the world in his transformed state. If you can, shoot to wound. If you can't, shoot to kill. I scooped up the gun with the silver bullets and headed out the door. Satori was usually at his restaurant just out of town when he required our services. That's where we went down to the basement. So I figured that was probably the first place where Gerald went, though I'll admit I didn't know how it worked. Can werewolves remember and reason? Either way, that was the only thing I could think of to do. When I got outside, I saw that Gerald's car was still in the driveway, meaning he'd taken off on foot, or paws, or whatever those horrible and sharp appendages were called. He was incredibly fast, had gotten a head start, and could travel places where cars couldn't. But there was still a good chance I could get there before him if I sped. The only question was if I wanted to get there before him. Satori had ordered the death of his wife and children. He deserved to die. For that reason, I decided not to speed to the restaurant. Well, for that reason, plus the fact that it was hard to focus on the road. The pain in my shoulder seemed to be spreading out, setting my body on fire. A werewolf bit me, I thought. That can't be good. After a few minutes of driving, I arrived at Satori's Italian restaurant. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but no signs of activity until I heard the gunshots and screams coming from inside. I decided to let Gerald finish his business. I got out of my car and sat crouched behind it, the gun clenched in my hand, aiming at the front door. I figured I had one shot and one shot only. I would aim for the thigh if I could. Gerald had given me shooting lessons and I'd gotten fairly proficient, but I knew that it would be hard to hit a target capable of moving so fast with any kind of precision. I crouched there for what seemed like a long, dreadful time, as my fear mounted and the gun became slick with sweat. Then the door to the restaurant flew open, and there was the monstrous wolf, dripping in blood and gore. It dropped down on all fours and started sniffing the ground, giving me the perfect opportunity for a targeted shot. I tried to aim the gun, but I couldn't. My hand was shaking. I grasped it with my other hand as well, though that was weak with the pain spreading out from my shoulder. I clenched my jaw and tried to steady myself as Gerald continued sniffing the ground. Then he looked up, directly at my car. I started to squeeze the trigger, aiming in his general direction. That was the best I could do. Suddenly, I saw a flash of silver, and Gerald's wolf head came flying off its body. I released the trigger and watched in horror and confusion as the head hit the ground with a thud. The body remained standing for several seconds, convulsing before it too dropped to the ground. Then the head and body transformed back into their human forms. I stayed crouched down, trying to figure out what had happened. Two men emerged from behind a jeep. One had a gun pointing at Gerald's corpse. The other walked over and picked something off the ground. "Damn Jameson, you've got pretty good aim with that thing," said the man with the gun. I looked to see that Jameson was holding some kind of silver brooch. Yeah, well, if I'm being honest, the thing kind of has a mind of its own. Do you think it will work, Clarence? Against the big one this Friday? I sure as shit hope it does, kid, said Clarence, rolling Gerald's severed head over with his foot. Huh, never seen this one before. These fuckers are coming out of nowhere in droves. That's bad, right? Asked Jameson. Well, it's good for business, said Clarence, bending down to pick up Gerald's head by the hair. He stuffed it into a duffel bag that he had around his shoulder. But in general? If you're asking, in general, Whether it's a good or bad thing that we've got a shitload of werewolves coming out as we get closer and closer to the full moon, if you're asking, in general. Whether it's a good or bad thing that the big one is coming, well, Jamie, I'd have to say that it's a very bad thing, in general. Now help me with the body. I watched in helpless horror and confusion as the two men dragged my friend's body over to the trunk of the Jeep. They hoisted him in. Then they got in the front and pulled out of the parking lot. I have been locked inside my house for the past 2 days now. The pain at first spread throughout my body until I couldn't move or think. Then it was gone, replaced by incredible alertness and feeling of vigor. A thick patch of hair has begun to sprout on my shoulder, at the spot where Gerald bit me. I am, without a doubt, turning into a werewolf. The full moon is in 5 days. Where do werewolves sit in the cinema? Anywhere they want to. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I was always jealous of my best friend, Don. He had life. Great job. Awesome digs. Nice car. The thing I was the most jealous of was his perfect wife, Tabitha. They had the perfect marriage. Tabitha supported everything he did. Trusted him completely. Was not a spendthrift or high maintenance. She gave other men that stared at her nasty looks and let everyone around her know she was his girl. She cooked amazing food. She was a total bombshell. And he told me, although never giving details, that after going to bed with her, he never wanted to sleep with another woman. We had a brunch together, a month ago, and my life changed forever. We met at a local sports bar and had wings and beer. I was cut from work early as I approached overtime. He could leave whenever as long as his quotas were met. Plus, he was acting chief operations officer right now, which made him my boss. I sat down in the booth with him. We talked for about a half hour, demolishing wings, drinking beer, sports, etc. You know you're my only married friend that is okay to do this. Tom and Larry are always like, I have to check with Susan or the kids have baseball games. I said. That's 'cause they suck. And so do their wives and fake happy lives. You know they're miserable. I go home and my baby is hot and ready. She pushes me to be better. All I have to do is take care of her. He replied. Don was always the man. He could act like a tool, but he was right. I didn't want to end up like Larry or Tom. I dreamed of a marriage like Don's. 7 years of marriage and they're running strong. Larry and Tom have been married less long than Don and they wanna kill themselves. Hanging out with them is a bummer. Don wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked right at me with a smile. I have some good news for you, bro. Yeah? Is another perfect girl out there waiting for a guy like me? He replied, sarcastically. He continued his smile. Tabitha's sister, Rachel, is coming down this weekend. Debbie talked you up to her and she really wants to meet you. So you're coming over tonight. I won't take no for an answer, bro. I was amazed. A little sister of Tabby's wants to meet me? I need to know if this was real. You got a picture of her? I asked. Tabitha said that she didn't want to spoil the surprise by showing you a picture of her. Also, she was right. He began drinking his beer as I sat, perplexed. Right about what? I asked. He put his beer down, took a breath, and said, it is fucking creepy when people ask for pics of people's relatives. We both laughed. I cheered his glass and we finished our drinks. As soon as we parted ways I raced to my apartment. I was excited to meet Rachel. I sang in the shower. I sang while I got ready. I pictured every amazing actress in my head. I pictured a sexier version of Tabitha, if such a woman exists. My phone rang. A number I did not recognize. I answered. Hello, this is Chad. Good afternoon, Chad. This Detective Sam Pearl? Are you an employee of Ethan Davis? He asked. Yes, he's my boss, I replied. I'm calling to inform you that he has been missing for the past 5 days. His family has become concerned. Any ideas? He has literally vanished. He asked. Ethan was always busy. I saw him twice a month maybe. Horrible boss. Everyone was uptight when he was around. No, detective, I haven't a clue. I hear from him, I'll let you know. He wasn't really well liked if that helps. I've already gathered that much, sir. This case is pretty much a waste of time. To be honest, I'm in the middle looking for a missing schoolgirl. If you hear from your boss, let me know. We hung up and I thought about Ethan for a second, then back to this mysterious Rachel. I had such high hopes for her. I arrived at Don's right on time with a bottle of the best Merlot I could find. I rang the doorbell. Tabitha answered the door. Chad. Thank you for coming over. It's so good to see you. Come in. Come in, she said while embracing me. She led me to the kitchen where I saw Don chatting with who I assume was Rachel. Her back was turned to me. She had beautiful, long, black hair and an amazing figure. Don looked at me, triggering her to look at me. I didn't know anything about love at first sight, but now I do. She turned around and my heart collapsed. Chad, come over here, bro, said Don. I was literally walking over towards a goddess. Screw Tabitha. At that moment, I knew I would do anything this woman asked me to do. Hi, I'm Rachel. It's nice to meet you, she said, with her hand extended. Even her voice was perfect. In a split second, I imagined bright mornings, waking up next to her in white sheets. Chad. It is nice to meet you too. I wanted to skip all the introductions and embrace her, but I kept my swag. We had a bunch in common as we spoke. She had interests that I had never even thought of trying, like crazy shows and backpacking. She thought it was cool that I was side hustling as a poker player and loved casinos as much as I did, though she preferred blackjack and pay-I-go. We talked so long, we didn't even notice Tabby and Don grabbing their coats. Come on, you two lovebirds. We have reservations at Mackey's, he declared. Don had a limo waiting outside. We sat down and rode off. He popped a bottle of champagne. What's the occasion, Don? I asked. Well, should be to friends, new and old, but I am now the new Chief Operations Officer, so. We all raised our glasses congratulating him. We began having a party in the limo. Rachel was already touching me and nestling on my shoulder playfully, but still being a little coy. I loved it. Every moment made me want her more. We arrived at Mackey's Steakhouse. As we got out, in display chivalry, he helps Tabby and Rachel out of the limo as Don followed them out. We walked in together and began a conversation with me as we looked at the gorgeous sisters in front of us. Look at those gorgeous ladies, Chad. You bet not cock this up, cause I guarantee you won't find a better woman. I wouldn't dream of it, buddy, I replied. Congrats on the promotion again. I didn't want to bring it up, but Don was promoted to Ethan's old position. So, I did. Speaking of, a detective called me earlier about. Don interrupted me, very casually. Detective Pearl? I know. I was called too. Let's not talk about the stupid brick, Ethan. He probably faked his death to rip somebody off or something. No one liked that maggot anyway. Let's enjoy the night, my friend. I shrugged it off. He was right. In corporate America, when guys like that disappear, it benefits society. Fuck him. I got the sexiest woman alive, in an expensive restaurant, with my best friend, who is now my boss. Life is sweet. The night was filled with drinks and good times. We went clubbing and I learned more about Rachel. She's a paralegal. She loves the law. She looks beautiful in anything, and enjoys sexy lingerie. Guys would stare at her and she would move next to me and give them nasty looks like they didn't have a chance. My love and desire for her burned brighter. When we got back to Don's and enjoyed a nightcap together by his luxurious outdoor fireplace, I was preparing to leave and she walked me to my car. "Hey, I had a great time this evening," she said. "At the risk of being vulnerable, is it possible I can see you tomorrow? I know you're only in town till Sunday," I asked. "I would love nothing more," she said as her voice faded while leaning into me. She gave me the most passionate kiss a woman has ever given me. "I can't wait until tomorrow. Why don't you?" She stopped me with her fingers on my lips and smiled. "Not tonight. Not yet. I'll see you tomorrow." She backed up staring at me, turned around and went inside. I was speechless. I got in my car and proceeded down the driveway. I was shuffling music when I looked up and hit the brakes. In the driveway crossed what appeared to be a large wolf. He stopped and looked at me with a large bone in his mouth. The bone was about the size of a human femur. He growled and then moved on. I was worried as I drove home, but then my mind went back to Rachel. I drove home and went to bed. I spent the whole day with Rachel. We met at the marina downtown, got lunch, made out on the water taxi, got ice cream, flirted and played games. We rode the trolley and proceeded back to my place around 6 in the evening. We couldn't hold back any longer. We got hot and heavy. This is not a porno, so like Don says, no deets. We fell asleep in my bed after our activities. I knew I could never sleep with another woman again. I drifted off with head on my chest, wondering if she was a fallen angel. I awoke to the sound of my apartment door closing. Rachel was gone. I looked at the clock. 12 o'clock. I got up, grabbed my pistol, and went to the door and saw Rachel taking her shoes off. She had a drop of blood running down the side of her lip. I rushed to her. "Are you okay?" I asked. I placed my gun back in my nightstand. "Sorry, I had to leave to go use the ladies' room. I'm not comfortable using your bathroom yet. I didn't mean to wake you. You're bleeding. Did someone hurt you?" I asked as I reached for her face. She backed away and wiped her mouth. "I'm fine, I promise. I think you bit my lip earlier," she said with her sexy voice. She looked at me with her as she placed her hands on my chest. She ran her fingertips down obs and I was immediately ready for action again. I was worried, but she was probably right. Her hands were touching in a way that my anatomy forced me to let it go. We went back to bed and went to sleep at like 6 in the morning. We slept the morning away and were invited back over to Don and Tabby's Sunday evening. We had a late lunch that I ordered from Uber Eats. I noticed that Rachel does not eat much. I thought that maybe that's the key to maintaining her figure. As we left, I saw a crime scene down the alleyway next to my building. There was blood everywhere. The police had it blocked off. "Did you see that?" I asked Rachel. "No. "What was it, my love?" she said. She called me her love, immediately dismissed it. "Nothing, my love. It was nothing." We made it over to Don's around 5 o'clock and enjoyed the weather on his deck. We sipped wine with them and talked about our Saturdays and what the next week had in store. The night approached and it was 10:30. I was feeling good. "Okay, ladies, it's about that time. You go have your conversation. I need to talk with my man, Chad, in the study." Rachel grabbed me to the side. "Chad, I think I'm going to move here and take that paralegal job at Don's Midtown branch. We can have lunch together all the time. I can't wait. Tabby and I will be back. Go have fun with Don. Please pay attention though, he has something important to talk to you about, darling." They went down the hallway chatting it up. I followed Don to his study. I was so excited about actually having a future with Rachel that I got giddy on the outside. All of a sudden, I had to piss, urgently. "Don, I'll be right back. I gotta take a leak." He stopped and looked up the ceiling. "Fine. Straight to the bathroom and straight back. We need to talk," he said sternly. I made my way to the bathroom. After my business was concluded, I stepped into the hall. I heard a voice that I recognized coming from down the hall. It was Ethan's voice. I followed the sound to an open door at the end of the hallway. I looked down the steps and saw 3 silhouettes on the wall. 2 of them belonged to the girls and the other was a man in a chair. His silhouette appears to be a stump. No legs. No arms. "Please, stop eating me. No more," he said. I confirmed that was Ethan's voice. I began to move closer. Before I could get closer, the silhouettes of the girls turned into the shadows of beasts with gigantic teeth and they began devouring Ethan. The shadows were digging into the chest and neck. I stepped back in horror as his screams were silenced. All of a sudden a hand came over my mouth and I was in a chokehold. I couldn't counter the move. I realized it was Don as he told them to be quiet. Don dragged me to his study and threw me on the couch. "Don't freak out, dude," he said. I rose up to him and he pushed me back down to the couch. "Listen, let me explain. This is what I want to talk about." "What the fuck are they, Don?" I interrupted. He calmed me down and handed me a drink. "They're the perfect women with crazy appetites. They are amazing and they love us. They don't eat the partners they choose as long as we take care of them. Listen, this is a lot to absorb. I know it was for me when I first met Tabby." "You just fed them, Ethan, Don," I interrupted. "I know, but fuck Ethan. He was a pompous asshole from a long line of pompous assholes. He deserved to be my wife's meal. Every prick I ever fed her deserved it and had it coming. I fed her my uncle, Tom, for molesting my niece. This is an awesome gig, dude." I stepped back and sat down absorbing what he was saying. "Listen, you only saw silhouettes. You can pretend this is just part of the relationship. You will be so happy. You love Rachel, right?" I answered immediately, "Yes. I do." He smiled at me with that bro smile. He held out his glass to me. "Then as your boss and future brother-in-law, we have your future to discuss." I was strong enough to forget this. I didn't want to end up like Tom and Larry. We cheer our glasses. Last week, we celebrated my promotion to Executive Vice President of Sales. I made love to Rachel all night in our new home as we celebrated after she finished her meal. I owe all sorts of toys and I have the most beautiful wife in the world. A word to all of you out there, don't screw with me, or you may be her next meal. Hello, friends. Hey, please stop it. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. The echo of a guttural, blood-curdling roar flies across the land, spreading terror and madness in its wake. A beast haunts the forest once more, and the call for heroes has been carried to the nearest towns and settlements. It is a desperate cry for help, one that only the most foolish would answer. Amidst the raging storm, a crack of jagged lightning splits the night and reveals three men entering through the mold-covered entrance of the village. Athenous the general. Behind the mustachioed, battle-scarred face lay myths and rumors. Nobody knows who he is, but everyone has heard something. Some say he is a Greek smuggler who sold opium along the Turkish coast. Others say he was the glorious battle commander of a faraway kingdom waging war on savage barbarians and prosperous empires alike. All that is certain is what one can see. An old man built like an ox with a short fuse and a sharp tongue. Damian the soldier. His long unkempt hair and scruffy beard hide a once most devout crusader. When the call for zealous men came to go east and reclaim the Holy Cross from the hands of the defilers, a young Damian jumped at the opportunity to shine bright for God. The horrors of war change even the most pious of men, though, and Damian is no exception. Wissant the priest. His face riddled with disease, his hair a greasy moat around the bald center of his head, and his smile a rotten collection of crooked teeth and chaffed lips. His ugly excuse of a face a perfect mirror of his soul. He was in the Crusades. His camp scorched to the ground, and he the sole survivor. Forever branded a traitor and a renegade. It is a wonder why God keeps answering his prayers. The village seems deserted, for men and women are huddled together in their homes, the warmth of their loved ones fending off the fear of natural and unnatural terrors. The group enters the tavern, the thick smell of alcohol and the drunken laughter a welcome change to the merciless downpour outside. The tavern owner, a tall and lean man, briefs them on the bounty. A werewolf roams the forest. The moonlight has claimed him. They will go after the beast with the first break of dawn when the elements rambling outside have subsided. The night is long though, and the vice is plenty. Wissant downs drink after drink until his head slams against the bar. Athenous gambles his soul away. Damian has time most lavish and decadent at the hands of ladies who only come at night. Morning arrives, but nature still hasn't ceased. The rain will mask our scent. Or maybe not. Who cares? Let's get this over with. Athenous quips and the group reluctantly agrees. The rain falls heavy on the leaf-covered ground and a thin veil of mist dances around the companions' feet as they make their way to the heart of the forest. They do not flinch when cackling laughter echoes in the woods. They do not break when visages of long-lost loved ones cry for them. They carry on, their watchful gaze shining with resolution and confidence. The closer they get to the center of the cursed forest, the clearer the path of carnage the beast carved becomes. The ghosts of slaughtered victims roam these grounds, their faces still bearing the mark of fear and suffering as they dart and float around the companionship. A skeleton of ages past is scattered at the roots of a towering tree, bone and wood melting into one macabre exhibit of the perverse. Suddenly, a hulking shadow flashes towards the group. In a flurry of fur and claw, the werewolf is upon Damian, tearing at him with teeth dripping of death. The soldier fights through the shock and impales the beast in its shoulder, forcing it to retreat behind the trees. But Damian is already slipping into oblivion. I will hold it back, be quick. Athenus yells as he strides towards the beast. Wissant rushes to Damian and kneels beside him. He takes some powders and dust out of a pouch and blows them at the soldier's face. In a hushed and trembling voice, he recites a prayer for his fallen comrade. The werewolf snaps its jaws at Athena but is met with the cold steel of a buckler and then the harsh metal of a mace. It lets out a cry of pain and steps back to recover. Athenus though is hot on its tail and keeps the pressure on. With a quick jab, it forces the beast out of balance and follows up with a blow to the side of its head. Then, he connects the mace with its shoulder and then its hind leg, forcing the werewolf to its knees. Athenus winds up for the killing blow, but before he can end the foul creature, the slippery ground claims him and he plummets headfirst into the mud. The beast spares no moment. It pounces to its feet and strikes Athena across the chest. His armor opens up like a night flower in the morning sunlight, revealing the gory mess of his chest. He tries to breathe but inhales nothing but blood. With iron resolution the man pushes on, pushing away the mind-numbing pain and the certain death that awaits. In one last hurrah, he swings his mace and parries the beast's deadly blow. Time seems to stop. The droplets of rain and sweat off the man's brow and the beast's fur collide and hang in the air. A streak of sanguine floats towards the skies, where the moon presides over the unruly ether from its opening in the black clouds. Athenus stares into their werewolf's gaping mouth, where animalistic hatred and obsidian abyss stare back at him. The beast plunges its teeth into Athenus' neck and jerks its muzzle from side to side, ripping the man's throat apart. With a final swing, it sends the grisly corpse flying. The werewolf stands up and howls, blood, gore, and saliva flying in the air. Wissant now stands alone. Witness to this horrible sight, the old man is shaken, but not broken. He valiantly steps forward and raises his eyes to meet the gaze of the beast. Two orbs of black malice and hunger stare back at him. Wissant's eyes in response flare with a bright vengeance. He grabs his robe and swiftly yanks it away from his body. A flash of light burns the growing darkness. Gone is the dirty old man. In his place stands the regal figure of a fierce warrior of God's will draped in shining silver chain mail. Wissant is not a mere priest. He is the battle ecclesiarch, the first crusader, leader of the blessed, the flame that holds darkness at bay. With a confident swoop, he unsheaths his sword, a sliver of light cutting up the lurking shadows. The blasphemous monstrosity recoils in terror. Even in its beastly and wretched form, it knows. It knows of the blood the sword has drunk, the souls it separated from the body, the screams of horror no man's mouth should shout. Images of the paladin cutting down hordes of infidels blaze into the creature's hollow mind. It howls, trying to assert dominance once more, but nothing escapes its mouth but a pup's weak whimper. Without skipping a beat, Wissant calmly steps forward and draws a jewel-adorned cross from his belt. The rays of light reflecting off the holy symbol scorch and burn the beast and bind it to its knees. The trees bend and tremble in response to its wild growls. The beast madly flails and thrashes, its muscles bulging and its limbs twisting, but it is stricken to its place by the weight of the cross. The paladin is now upon it, staring down the foaming and frothing abomination. His sword, humming of silver and holy fervor, connects with the beast again and again. The vile creature is no match for the divine avenger as it crumbles motionless to the ground. Silence as cold as winter's cradle falls upon the forest. His footsteps are heavy, and long-buried memories sneak their way to the surface on his way back to the village. Infidels, they called them. The blood of man in his hands. women and children raped and strangled. In the name of the Holy Father. A city scorched to the ground. He had to burn them, it was the only way. Wissant drapes himself in his ragged robe and continues down the muddy path, the pouring rain crashing down on his shoulders. The villagers greet him with gasps of shock, disbelief etched on their faces. Gazes and hushed whispers follow Wissant into the tavern. He sits at the bar and motions for a drink. The bartender collects himself and pours him a thick sanguine liquid. So, is it over? The beast is dead. Wissant downs his drink and motions for another. The others? Wissant gives him a stinging look and again downs his drink. Then another, and another, and another. So, you are the only one left. I have to admit, we didn't expect you to kill Pete. We underestimated you. Wissant looks at him over his glass. The bartender's head violently snaps back and his hands shoot towards the bar. His nails start growing sharp and thick. Black patches of hair start forming on his arms. Wissant jumps from his stool and goes for his sword, but he loses his balance and stumbles back. His vision goes blurry as the alcohol courses through his veins. The bartender's back arches upward, his shoulders widen and his torso pushes out of his clothes. He lets out a cry of pain. My brethren, tonight we dine in blood. He yells. Wissant unsheaths his sword. Screams of agony can be heard from outside. The bartender's mouth opens up wider and wider until his jaw dislodges. Dense and foul blood oozes out of his mouth as his neck grows and locks forward. When the blood stops, a gruesome muzzle crawls its way out of his mouth. His face is now just a wrinkled piece of bloody cloth. His eyes turn red before they explode into a grimy mess and the top of his skull cracks open, mushed brain and gore spilling out. Wissant tries to steady himself. Dizia Dizilla. The door to the tavern busts open and two more grotesque monstrosities stumble inside. One is a woman coughing a wolf's head out of her throat and the other is a man, his eyes bulging and bleeding, walking on wolf's hind legs. Wissant forces his way to him and stabs him in the throat. Nil insulted Remambit. The bartender's body cracks and groans as the beast takes form. The wolf's head is now fully free. It opens its eyes and howls. It howls a bloody call that is met by more howls. The beast shakes off the last remnants of human skin and jumps on the counter, its claws digging deep into the wood which splinters under the immense weight. Wissant swings his sword and takes out another beast. But he is surrounded and the circle is closing in fast. In Gemisco, Tamquam Reus. A beast strikes him across the back. He falls to his knees, his sword flying out of reach. Ni perennial cremerigan. The beasts dive onto the man, taking him apart piece by piece, the ravenous blows landing one after the other and all together. They bathe in his blood and revel in his flesh as his screams die out. It is an orgy of blood and gore.